Welcome once again to another crime-busting and/or crime-causing episode of What Happened, the show that was made to chronicle the developments of video games exactly like our subject today.
Yeah, thanks again, Jackie. I appreciate the intro.
No problem, man.
Sleeping Dogs was an open-world sandbox action title that hit late in the 7th generation, and if you were a fan of the genre at the time, you've most likely heard of it. Much noise was made about its cancellation, resurrection, and then its eventual cancellation again.
That's manslaughter at best.
It's one of those Cinderella stories you don't often hear about in this industry, but sadly, one that didn't exactly get the Triple S Miracle Happily Ever After ending most burgeoning franchises hope to achieve. So chug some Dragon Kick and wolf down a bowl of spicy noodles. It's time to find out what happened to Sleeping Dogs.
You look like you could use a pork bun.
United Front Games was established in British Columbia in 2007 and consisted initially of 10 employees from studios like Radical Entertainment, Black Box Studios, and Rockstar Vancouver. ACTIVISION came sniffing around almost immediately as they were looking to add more open-world games to their portfolio, as the genre was still very much
Say the line, Bart!
Just dial at the time.
Fortunately, building an open-world game was just what the studio was looking to do, as most of their workforce had experience with games like Bully, Hulk Ultimate Destruction, and finally, Simpsons Hit and Run. I'll get back to that walkthrough this year, I swear. The team started looking to Hong Kong action cinema for inspiration, and dubbed the project Black Lotus, which remained as a temp name. For the first 6 months, Activision was very hands-off, letting United Front flesh out their vision, but that took a swift and sudden turn with the release of The arrival of Rockstar's Juggernaut shook Activision execs to their core, who felt that Black Lotus now had to outdo and compete with GTA on just about every level, which is a lot to ask of a brand new studio. Design director Mike Scupa had this to say about United Front's concerns with this approach. That was not even remotely within our design, not even remotely within our capabilities. People would say to you, it's got to have everything GTA has. People want rocket launchers, and they want jetpacks. Another time, I was told this game would be like Rush Hour. If you want to make that game, we should stop, go back into pre-production, and talk about making that game. Because you can't just change a game like that. This bit needs some extra context. Activision started feeling that Black Lotus should take on a more comedic bend, and mimicking the tone and style of the Rush Hour movie franchise would let the game carve out a more distinct identity. Imagine someone telling you, yeah, internal affairs is okay, but what the kids really want is Rush Hour.
Oh, hell no. No, he just playing, man. He mean that?
United Front resisted this mandate, of course, as they had been pushing forward with a grittier story and scenario for almost a year by that point. However, behind their backs, Activision had contracted an outside writer to draft up a more wacky, comedy-infused take, and were pushing to use it. We had 2 scripts. One of them was a lowbrow, you could almost call it a comedy, and the other was the script of the game we wanted to make. Activision started sending more and more producers and hired even more regular staff at United Front, as the game's scope kept ballooning, even as the war between scripts was still raging. Eventually, a compromise was reached when Activision pitched to rebrand Black Lotus as True Crime Hong Kong, which was more of a surface-level marketing ploy than anything else. The True Crime series hadn't seen a new entry since 2005's New York City, which was a critical and commercial failure, which was curious because that game included Christopher Walken.
Oh, Mr. Hotshot, perhaps I should just go home, kick off my shoes, have a nice cup of cocoa, because it sounds like you've got the case figured out.
Activision felt that the boost off some brand recognition might be enough for the game to stand out, rather than to take a riskier chance with a brand new franchise. Thankfully, this meant that United Front could stick to their original plan. They didn't need to change the tone or story content, but it did mean they'd have to expand the game's scope and features. The True Crime series had revolved around three main pillars: driving, shooting, and melee combat, but with GTA 4 putting the pressure on, side activities, collectibles, and the size of the game world would need to scale up. While the staff was growing, crafting something as big and feature-rich as GTA with what was ostensibly a brand new team proved problematic. Progress was slow as new features kept getting added, and while the game was formally announced at the Spike Video Game Awards, aka CRINGEFEST 2009,
ladies and gentlemen, please welcome legendary game designer Todd Howard.
Thanks.
it was delayed until 2010, and then to a nebulous 2011. Producer Dan Sochin outlined the problems that the team faced. Open world is by far the most challenging genre I've ever worked on in my career, and this game has certainly been the toughest game I've ever worked on, but also probably the most satisfying. It's tough because all the systems are intertwined. Sometimes we found adding just 1 or 2 more frames in a basic run animation would blow our animation across the entire game. Characters would T-pose, and you would see that and you would ask, what happened? And you find out someone added a couple of frames to a facial animation. Now all of a sudden some combat moves are no longer working. You're constantly battling resource management, how many pedestrians you have on screen versus how many cars, and they all need to work seamlessly together. It's technical art, how to get them all looking the best they can while still working together. In a February 2011 financial report, Activision let slip that they were canceling True Crime Hong Kong due to what they called quality concerns. Former Activision Publishing CEO Eric Hirschberg said that the competition from Rockstar, coupled with the multiple delays and budget increases, made it so that they needed to sell millions upon millions of units just to recoup costs, and felt that their investment would not be returned. Over 100 jobs were made redundant from their 200-strong staff, and United Front were forced into a situation where they needed to entice a new publishing partner. Mike Scupa recounted this time when the studio was pitching 2 other specific projects. One, a reboot of a Dream license, which was not named, with the other being a game called Made in Detroit, which was a mix of Mad Max and The Last of Us. Just swap out the mushroom zombies and wastelanders for robots and there you go. Neither project materialized, and as the months dragged on and things were looking grim, that's precisely when... If you recall, Square Enix had absorbed Eidos back in 2009, so they were keen to add more Western-focused games in their stable of franchises, and thus worked out a deal with Activision to buy the publishing rights to True Crime Hong Kong, but not the True Crime IP itself, if that makes any sense. This was most likely due to the IP being pretty worthless, so Square's plan was to rebrand the project again under a fresh new moniker that they would wholly own. While the original codename of Black Lotus was certainly in contention as a possible name, the final title was changed to Sleeping Dogs, which referred to the game's premise of a sleeper agent posing as a TRIAD gang member. Apparently, at the time of this acquisition, the game was in an alpha state and could be played, although roughly, to completion, something Dan Sochin expanded upon in interviews. We had a fair amount of the gameplay done at that point. They, Square Enix, really know the process of making open-world games. They've worked on Just Cause, and they understand what it takes to make a fluid and intuitive combat system, as shown by their work with Rocksteady on Batman Arkham Asylum. It has been a great partnership for us, and they've really allowed us to have the time we needed to take the game from great to fantastic. The music, the characters, the story, none of that's changed. It's just given us additional time to really polish the areas that we needed to. We added a couple of cool features too, like the upgrade system and the online leaderboards. Take a sec to think about how many studios Activision has either abandoned or closed down themselves. Radical Entertainment, Bizarre Creations, and Eurocom, just to name a few, so it seemed very likely at the time the same fate would befall United Front. Typically, games barely get out of the pre-production phase before the money dries up or some other type of plug is pulled, but here, most of the production was already in the rear view, so the fact that another publisher swooped in at the 11th hour was exceedingly rare. Now, since the majority of the game had been paid for by Activision, the financial investment by Square was lower than it would have been otherwise, but they were going to be responsible for the game's marketing as well as footing the bill for all the Hollywood actors that lent their voices. Actors like Lady Deathstrike, Gwen Stacy, and of course, Iori Yagami. Thankfully, Square wasn't being cheap here. There was a pretty sizable marketing campaign leading up to Sleeping Dogs' release, including interviews with all the cast, as well as an elaborate short film meant to show off the game's cinematic style and fight sequences. Dozing Doggers released on the PS3, 360, and PC in August of 2012, which was as good a time as any, as it was far away from the busy fall and winter months. It should be noted, however, it did need to compete with the Darksiders sequel on the very same day, as well as Fall of Cybertron, and on top of them all, Expendables 2, the game.
We're looking for a Chinese businessman. Where should we be looking?
Fortunately, the blood-soaked tale of Wei Shen managed a pretty good critical reception for the most part, with plenty of outlets praising the story and the combat, while some criticized repetitive mission design and a general lack of innovation in the open-world space. But plenty of fixes and support was coming, cause damn, Sleeping Dogs had a whole heap of DLC all lined up. Lots of additional outfits, cars, and story packs, including one with an Asian spin on the zombie expansion that was so common during the 7th generation. Here's unfortunately where things start to get sour. United Front had already started designing and planning out a sequel, although it hadn't yet been greenlit, as the positive reception from critics and fans was enough to inspire them to come up with new ideas. It would again follow Wei Shen, but he'd now have to tag with a corrupt partner named Harry Fang to investigate Hong Kong's Pearl River Delta. It was going to feature 2-player co-op as well as single-player, which would have seen the narrative split between Wei and Harry whenever the story dictated. United Front also planned to make a companion app on mobile phones, where you played as Jane Teng, allowing you to send in helicopters and manage police resources with the touch of a button, which also affected the main game. Finally, they were hoping to sync all players' save data to the cloud, which would help them track and implement a persistent crime level in each district, which would have affected the presence of other rival gangs and police. While all this sounds very extra, they were targeting it for the Xbox One and PS4. Sadly, however, this sequel never got out of the garage.
Don't let the locals hear you say that.
In 2 months, Sleeping Dogs had sold 1.5 million copies, not bad at all for a brand new IP, but Square Enix had said this number was below expectations. 1 year later, in September of 2013, Square then followed that up by saying most of their Western-focused games, Tomb Raider, Hitman Absolution, and Sleeping Dogs specifically, had all underperformed and considered them financial failures. Now, I know that seems a bit odd considering Tomb Raider got 2 more sequels, but what most likely happened here is that since they all sold similar numbers, but were also all expensive to make and market, that they only wanted to push one. So obviously, since Lara was the more recognizable of the trio, her franchise was kept in Square's lineup, while Wei Shen and Agent 47 were pushed into the background. Fortunately, the puppies wouldn't be napping for too long, because 2014 saw the release of Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition, which packed in every bit of DLC for the Xbox One, PS4, and PC. Unfortunately though, maybe due to it being a pretty simple remaster and the game was only 2 years old at that point, Definitive Edition didn't really move the needle much. What this also meant was that United Front's ambitious plans for a sequel were spent on something far less ambitious. TRIAD Wars was an MMO spin-off that was released in beta form on Steam and was absolutely not what anybody wanted at all. While a press release mentioned that this was an idea that United Front had, it's a bit extremely suspicious that Square were also the publishers of Nosgoth, which was the exact same concept launched at the exact same time. For more info on that, check out my Legacy of Kain Dead Son video. Anyway, the reception to Triad Wars was about what you'd expect. It was never officially released as a full game and thus got its face smashed in early 2015. It's around here where Square just didn't seem interested in United Front as a studio, since they never purchased them outright. Therefore, they started pitching even more projects, including one called Mechanica, a third-person shooter with online co-op that had players blasting rogue robots in a future San Francisco.
Why did they hate robots so much?
Their last game, Smash Grab, was a self-published online brawler that saw various gangs causing destruction to build up buffs, which would then give them an advantage in combating the other teams. The bizarre thing about Smash Grab was that it was announced and released on the exact same day, eerily similar to that dorky 80s battle royale thing that some guy released. Does anyone even remember his name? Smash Grab's completely out of the blue announcement and subsequent release took many in the company by surprise, including creative director Mike Scupa. At that point, you're kinda like, there's an unnecessary rush here. At the time, I said I didn't want to promote a product that's not going to come out. And I was promised, no, we have enough money to go for 6 more months. The thing was, United Front didn't actually have a 6 more months left, because in less than 1 after Smash Grab's release, staff were told that the studio was bankrupt, and with no other publishers willing to invest on the horizon, they were dead in the water. They officially closed their doors in 2016. Now that didn't necessarily mean the Sleeping Dogs IP was dead, just mostly.
You gotta be fucking kidding me, man!
In 2017, conversations began about a Sleeping Dogs film, which was a bit weird considering Square obviously had no more interest in the franchise. Then, in 2020, Hong Kong action legend Donnie Yen expressed his interest in producing and starring in it, although no updates have arisen since. I guess Square might be a bit too busy with live service games and prepping for their horrible NFT-filled future.
Great, finally hit the big time.
And that's where we currently stand today. And while it's certainly bittersweet, at least Sleeping Dogs came out, with United Front beating the odds, unlike several games we've covered here on this very show. So while it would have been ideal if the franchise had continued to the point where Wei Shen could have been as big as Max Payne, CJ, or whoever you controlled in the Driver games. Wait, why don't we hear about Driver anymore? Oh, right. If you know of any other fumbling, free-roaming frustrations, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or drive a motorcycle into the windows of the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss and nominate what I'll be covering in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching!
Oh.